The wetlands had always been a mysterious place for the people living nearby. From a distance, it looked peaceful, wide open, and almost calm, but everyone who worked around it knew that the land could turn dangerous without warning. It only took one night of heavy rain for the firm ground to melt into soft, deep mud, and the small pools of water could stretch into hidden pits that acted like traps. People usually stayed away unless they had a reason to go in. Still, the place was full of life. Birds circled above the tall grass, insects hummed through the air, and small animals moved quietly among the reeds. But on this particular week, the wetlands were hiding a struggle that no one had seen. A young predator beast, barely old enough to be hunting on its own, had wandered farther than it ever had before. It had followed the scent of a small creature, something it believed would be an easy meal. Maybe it had been too confident, or maybe the changing weather had confused it, but one wrong step was all it took. The ground gave way under its weight, not with a sudden crash, but with a slow sinking pull. The mud grabbed its legs, and before it understood what was happening, its body was already halfway inside a mire pocket filled with thick water. At first, it reacted on pure instinct. It tried to jump out, but the mud only pulled harder. It twisted, kicked, and clawed, sending splashes of dark water in every direction. The more it fought, the deeper it went. Its heavy breathing mixed with the sound of the swamp, but no one was there to hear it. After a few minutes, the young animal stopped its wild movements, panting hard and trying to gather whatever strength it had. The mud held it tightly, like a heavy blanket wrapped around its legs and belly. The first day was full of fear and confusion. The young beast had never been trapped before. It tried again and again to climb out. Each attempt weakened it a little more. Every time it pushed up, the mud slipped beneath it, and it fell back into the same sunken position. The water wasn't clean, just a mix of dirt, plants, and old rainwater, and it gave no refreshment. The sun rose high in the sky, and the heat pressed down on the wetland, slowly sucking moisture from the animal's body. By the time the sun began to lower, painting the swamp in soft orange light, the predator beast was worn out. It didn't understand why the ground had turned so dangerous, or why the world suddenly felt so unforgiving. It only knew that it needed to get out before night came. Night in the wetlands meant cold winds, strange sounds, and shadows that moved in ways no young creature wanted to face alone. It tried once more to escape, pushing the mud with all the strength left in its front legs, but it didn't manage more than a few inches. Soon it sank back into place and rested its head on the wet ground, exhausted. As darkness settled in, the swamp changed its voice. Crickets chirped. Frogs made deep calls. Something splashed in a nearby pool. The young beast lifted its head slightly, alert for a moment, but it couldn't move fast enough to protect itself if anything came close. Fortunately, nothing did. The night passed slowly, hour by hour, and the beast remained trapped, waiting for the first light of morning. When the next day arrived, it was no kinder than the first. The sun climbed back into the sky, lighting up the swamp and waking the insects. The mud around the animal had dried a little on the surface, turning it into a crust that felt even tighter. The young predator tried again to move, but this time its legs trembled. The days of running, exploring, and playing in the wild had never prepared it for something like this. The hunger it felt was sharp, but the thirst was worse. The muddy water around it offered almost no relief. Every small sip tasted stale. The animal knew it needed fresh water, but none was within reach. The only thing it could do was tilt its head forward and take another mouthful of muddy liquid just to keep itself alive a little longer. Hours passed, slow and heavy. The sun continued to rise, heating the swamp until waves of warm air shimmered above the reeds. Birds circled overhead, their shadows passing across the mud. One bird landed on a branch not far away, staring at the trapped creature with curious eyes. For a moment, the beast lifted its head, trying to show it was still strong, but the effort drained the last bit of energy it had saved. By midday, the animal's body had grown sluggish. The first day had been full of energy and fear. The second day was full of exhaustion. It kept its eyes half closed, listening to the distant sounds of the wetland. Somewhere far away, it could hear the calls of larger animals moving through safer ground. Maybe its own family was out there, unaware that it had wandered too far and too deep into danger. The thought of safety, whatever that meant to a young beast, made it try one more time to break free. Its legs pushed, its claws dug into the mud, and its body shook with effort. But nothing changed. The mire was stronger. As the day faded again into evening, the first signs of dehydration began to show. The beast's breath came shallow and slow. Its mouth felt heavy and dry. Its eyes lost the bright spark that young animals always carried. When night arrived for the second time, the swamp grew cold again. The young predator curled its body as much as it could, trying to keep warm, but the mud held it in one position, giving no comfort. The third morning arrived with gray light. The sky was cloudy, hinting at rain but not delivering any. If rain had come, it might have helped loosen the mud, or at least given the animal enough water to keep fighting. But the clouds only drifted by slowly, offering shade but nothing else. Now the animal's movements were slower than ever. Its legs twitched instead of pushing. Its head lifted only halfway. Hunger had emptied its stomach, but the lack of water was doing far more damage. The young predator was no longer trying every few minutes. Instead, it waited long stretches of time before gathering the energy for a small attempt that lasted only a few seconds. At one point, it lifted its head and looked toward the distance, as if expecting something or someone to appear. But nothing moved except the tall grass swaying gently with the wind. The day went on like that, slow and heavy. In the late afternoon, a soft breeze passed across the wetland, carrying the smell of distant rain. The beast breathed it in deeply, almost as if the smell alone gave it a little hope. It tried again to move its legs, but the mud refused, holding it in place. By the time the sky darkened once again, the animal's energy had nearly disappeared. But nature played a strange trick that night. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the swamp. A storm was forming, and the clouds moved quickly. The air thickened, and the wind became stronger. After hours of waiting, the first raindrop fell beside the trapped beast, then another. And soon the entire swamp was being washed by rain. The cool water touched the animal's body, and for a moment it felt relief. But the rain didn't loosen the mud enough to free it. It only softened the top layer, creating a thin layer of wetness that cooled its skin, but changed nothing about its situation. Still, the fresh drops on its tongue gave it a little strength, and it lifted its head just enough to drink from the falling rain. By morning, the storm had ended, and the swamp was quiet again. But the young predator was still trapped, weaker than ever, barely moving, half covered in mud and rainwater. Days had passed, and the battle between the beast and the mire had turned into something far more tragic, a slow decline. Unnoticed by the world around it. In that moment, the animal didn't think about hunting or exploring or running through the forest as it once did. It only felt the weight of the mud, the dryness in its throat, and the fading strength inside its body. The wetlands, which had once been full of life, now felt like a silent cage, and as the fourth day began, the young predator beast lay still in the mire, unaware that its fate was about to change in a way it never expected. For the next several days, the young predator beast lived in a strange world between waking and drifting. The swamp around it continued its usual rhythm, but the animal was trapped inside a slow, tiring struggle that didn't seem to end. Each morning arrived with a soft light passing over the reeds, but the sun no longer excited the beast the way it once did. Its body was drained, its muscles weak, and its thoughts slow. The days felt long, but at the same time, they blurred together. The biggest enemy it faced now wasn't the mud or the exhaustion, it was dehydration. The storm from the night before had given it a little strength, just enough to survive another day. But the rainwater that had gathered around it slowly sank into the mud or dried under the rising sun. By midday, the thin layer of clean water had almost disappeared. The animal lowered its head, licking the small patches of damp ground, but the moisture was too little to help. The sun climbed higher, and the air around the swamp turned hot again. The young beast felt the warmth pressing down on its body like a heavy blanket. It blinked slowly, trying to stay awake. If it closed its eyes for too long, everything inside its head grew fuzzy, and it became harder to lift them again. But staying awake wasn't easy either. The heat drained the small amount of energy it had left. A faint buzzing sound filled the air as insects hovered close. The swamp always came alive with buzzing during hot days, but today it felt louder than usual. A few of them landed on the beast's back, and although the sensation bothered it, it didn't have the strength to shake them away. Its muscles simply refused to move the way they once did. Hours passed. The mud around its legs had grown stiff again after the storm. Each time the animal shifted even a little, the dried surface cracked, but only enough to make the upper layer crumble, not enough to loosen the grip underneath. The deeper mud held firm, almost as if it were trying to keep the creature there forever. Every once in a while, the beast tried to move. It didn't push hard like it had on the first day. Those days of desperate struggling were over. Now it only tested the ground, hoping that the rain had changed something. It pressed its front leg forward, but the mud clung tightly. It tried again with its hind leg, but they barely responded. After a few weak attempts, it gave up and rested its head on the wet soil again. The hunger continued too, but hunger became something distant, something it had grown used to. The first 2 days had been painful, with its stomach twisting and growling, but now that feeling had softened into a dull emptiness. The real problem was thirst. Every breath left its mouth a little drier. Every lick of the remaining rainwater only gave enough relief for a minute or two. It tried dipping its mouth into the cold mud water, but the taste made it cough lightly. And the muddy texture offered nothing helpful as the sun reached its highest point. The swamp seemed to stand completely still. Even the wind took a break. The air hung heavy and warm. The young beast felt the heat building inside its body. Its tongue stayed partly out of its mouth, searching for any coolness. It turned its head toward the sky, hoping for clouds. But the sky was bright, an empty dot by mid-afternoon. The animal's breathing slowed even more. It no longer lifted its head to look around. Its eyes followed the movement of shadows, but its body hardly reacted. A few birds landed nearby, pecking in the mud for insects. They showed no fear of the trapped beast. They knew it couldn't move fast enough to chase them away. This slow decline continued for many days. The creature's world narrowed to the ground in front of its eyes and the mud around its body. Sometimes it thought it heard distant sounds, maybe the calls of other predators, or the footsteps of larger animals, but the noises were too faint to understand. Other times it imagined movement in the tall grass, but nothing came close. Everything stayed just out of reach. On the evening of what must have been the 6th or 7th day, the swamp was hit with a surprising breeze. The sky darkened earlier than usual, and the air smelled fresh. The young beast didn't have the strength to lift its head fully, but its eyes widened slightly. The scent of approaching rain filled the air again, and for the first time in days, the animal felt a spark of hope that it waited silently, barely breathing. The breeze turned stronger, pushing waves through the tall grass, making the swamp whisper with movement. The sky rumbled softly, a distant sound that carried a promise with it. The beast's ears twitched, reacting to the sound even though its body still lay almost motionless. But the storm did not come that night. Instead, the breeze passed across the swamp and moved on. The clouds stayed in the distance, teasing the land but never releasing rain. When the wind faded, the swamp returned to its usual stillness. The young predator exhaled slowly, letting its head drop a little. The hope it had felt vanished just as quietly as the storm clouds had died. As night arrived again, the air grew cooler. The beast shivered slightly, trying to curl itself into a warmer position. The mud held its lower body in place, but the upper part of its body trembled with the cold. Nights had become harder to endure, not because of fear, but because every small drop in temperature made its weak body feel even more tired. When morning came once more, a thin mist hung over the swamp. The air was damp, and the ground felt slightly softer. The young beast tried its legs again, thinking maybe this small change could help. It pressed down gently, but the mud still held firm. Still, the damp air brought a little comfort, cooling its dry mouth and skin. It lifted its head enough to catch the mist on its tongue, letting the small droplets melt inside its mouth, but the relief didn't last long. As the sun rose higher, the mist disappeared, leaving behind another hot day. The swamp dried quickly, faster than usual. The mud stiffened around its legs again, turning hard near the surface. The beast felt as if it were trapped inside a mold that grew tighter every hour. By now, the young predator had stopped thinking about escaping. It simply didn't have the strength left. Instead, it lay quietly, letting its mind drift away from the discomfort. Its ears twitched occasionally, reacting to bird calls, but even that movement grew weaker with time. On the 9th day, a group of scavenger birds circled above the swamp. They flew in slow circles, watching the trapped animal. They stayed at a distance for a long time, unsure if the creature was still strong enough to defend itself. The predator, noticing them with half-closed eyes, let out a soft sound, a mixture of warning and exhaustion. The birds hesitated and floated away for now. The beast had protected itself once more, but it had cost nearly all the energy it had left. That night, the young predator dreamt for the first time in days. It dreamed of running through open fields, of cool water flowing in a stream, of soft grass brushing against its legs. In the dream, there was no mud, no heat, no exhaustion. But when it opened its eyes again, the reality of the swamp returned instantly. The dream felt like a memory from another life. By the 10th day, the beast's body had grown extremely thin. Its breath was slow, its heartbeat faint. The only thing keeping it alive was instinct, the quiet, stubborn part of it that refused to stop trying. Every now and then, it attempted to lift its body, but the effort lasted only a second before it collapsed again. The days that followed were almost silent. The swamp moved around the animal, but it remained still. A small patch of sunlight rested on its back, warming it slightly. A few dragonflies zipped across the water. Distant calls echoed through the grasslands. But nothing changed for the young predator. Time passed, and the swamp watched quietly. It wasn't until the 12th or 13th day, no one could know for sure, that the animal stopped reacting to even the small things. A buzzing insect landed on its nose, and it didn't shake its head. A warm breeze brushed across its fur, and it didn't lift its ears. Its eyes stared forward, dull and tired, holding only the last pieces of life inside them. And this was the moment when the young predator finally stopped fighting. Not because it had given up in sadness, but because its body simply had no strength left. It lay still, almost motionless, accepting whatever the next day might bring. The struggle had been long, draining, and lonely, but destiny works in strange ways, especially in places like the wetlands. Just when the creature reached this quiet point of surrender, the story around it began to shift subtly at first, then suddenly. Footsteps would soon appear in this lonely place, footsteps that would change everything the trapped beast thought it knew about its fate. The young predator beast had reached a point where even breathing felt like effort. Days had blended together, long and heavy, and the strength it once carried was now just a faint memory. Its ears, which used to react to every sound in the wild, barely twitched anymore. Its eyes stayed half open, seeing shapes and shadows, but not fully understanding them. The swamp had swallowed almost all of its energy, and the creature slowly drifted into a quiet state of acceptance. The world around it didn't stop, though. The wetlands kept moving with life. Dragonflies danced above still water pools. Small frogs hopped from one clump of grass to another. Birds flew low, as if checking the ground for anything unusual. But none of these things mattered anymore to the trapped animal. It watched the world silently, half awake and half lost. On one warm afternoon, the beast tried lifting its head. Just a few weeks ago, something like that would have been simple. Now, it felt like trying to move a heavy rock. Still, it managed to raise it a little, enough to see the tall grass swaying in the soft wind. The movement of the grass looked peaceful, almost comforting, but it also reminded the animal of what it had lost, the freedom to move, to run, to hunt, to feel the world beneath its legs. After a few seconds, its head sank back into the muddy ground. The effort had taken everything it had left. The day continued in slow silence, broken only by the low hum of insects. The sun drifted across the sky, and by late afternoon, the creature's breathing had slowed even more. Every rise and fall of its chest was soft and faint dot. By this time, the predator beast no longer tried to escape. The fight inside, it had faded. It wasn't fear that filled its mind. Now it was calm, a quiet acceptance of whatever would happen next. The creature didn't hope for rescue, nor did it worry about danger. It simply existed in that moment, too tired to care about anything else. Sometimes it drifted into a light sleep. But even in sleep, its mind was not peaceful. It saw flashes, images of fresh green grass, cold water flowing over rocks, a distant open field where it had once chased small insects just for fun. These memories felt like dreams, far away and unreachable. When it woke again, it felt a little weaker each time. On the 15th or 16th day, no one could have kept track. The wind changed direction. It brought with it a new smell, something unfamiliar. The young beast didn't react at first, but slowly, after several minutes, one of its ears twitched slightly. It wasn't a strong reaction, more like a gentle reminder that some part of it still stayed alert. The smell grew stronger. It wasn't the scent of another animal. It wasn't the smell of the swamp. It was something different, something the beast didn't recognize, but instinctively knew was important. It took effort. But the beast lifted its head just a little, its gaze slow and unfocused. Its eyes scanned the tall grass, searching for the source of that new scent. The wind carried it again, brushing lightly against the beast's nose. It blinked slowly, trying to stay awake. Something was out there. Something was coming. But whatever it wasn't close yet. The day turned into evening again, and the swamp cooled under the softer light. The smell faded with time, and the beast lay still, unsure if it had imagined it. Soon, darkness settled over the wetlands. Night came with its usual chorus of sounds. The gentle croaks of frogs, the distant splash of a fish, the hushed movement of wind passing through reeds. The young predator listened without reacting. Its breathing had become steady but faint, like a quiet whisper. Its eyes closed slowly, not from comfort, but from exhaustion so deep that keeping them open felt impossible. When dawn finally arrived, the sky greeted the land with soft, pale light. The swamp glowed slightly as the sun rose, and the first rays brushed over the trapped creature. The warmth felt nice, but it also reminded the animal of how much energy the day would drain from its already fragile body. The scent returned again. A faint hint at first, then a little stronger. The beast opened its eyes halfway, aware this time that something was approaching. It listened carefully, and after a few seconds, it heard its soft footsteps pressing against the wet ground. Footsteps meant life. Footsteps meant movement. Something was getting closer. For a moment, fear flickered in the beast's eyes, but it vanished instantly. It didn't have the strength to defend itself. Whatever was coming, it could only wait. Its body remained still, its breathing shallow. The footsteps stopped. There was a quiet pause. The predator beast didn't look up right away. Instead, it listened. The silence felt different, now not empty, but expectant, as if the swamp itself held its breath. Then, gently, the tall grass parted. A human stood at the edge of the clearing. The beast's eyes widened slightly, not in panic, but in surprise. It had never seen a human up close before. The figure was covered in mud from walking through the wetlands, and their clothes were worn from long travel. They held a long stick in one hand and a small cloth bag in the other. Their breathing was heavy from the difficult walk. The human froze for a moment when they saw the creature trapped in the mire. The surprise in their eyes was clear. This was not something they had expected to find in a place like this. The creature stared back, its eyes dull but calm. It didn't have the strength to lift its head anymore. The human slowly stepped forward, careful not to scare it. They crouched down a few feet away, studying the animal with a careful gaze. What the human saw was not the fierce image of a predator. Instead, they saw a weak, dehydrated, exhausted young creature on the edge of giving up. They saw its thin frame, its cracked tongue, its muddy fur, and the heavy mud wrapped around its legs like chains. The human let out a small sigh, not of fear, but of concern. They took another step toward the creature. The beast's ears twitched weakly in response. It wasn't afraid. It didn't even have the energy to be afraid. The human spoke softly, though their voice was low and gentle, more like talking to themselves than expecting the animal to understand. The tone somehow brought a small sense of calm to the creature. Humans could be unpredictable in the wild, but this one didn't feel dangerous. There was something in their expression, something kind, something thoughtful. The young predator watched as the human slowly knelt beside the mud, observing the trapped legs. The human touched the mud gently, testing how deep it was and how tightly it held. Their fingers sank into the mire, and they pulled back slowly, trying to understand how long the creature had been there. The human stood again and looked around, searching for anything that could help. They walked a few steps into the grass, picked up a long branch, then returned. Carefully, they used the branch to push aside the top layer of dried mud around the beast's legs. The creature didn't move. It simply watched, its eyes following the human's actions. This was the first help it had received in weeks, even though the human wasn't freeing it yet. The simple act of clearing the mud brought a strange feeling to the tired animal hope. A quiet, small spark of hope that it had forgotten existed. The human brushed the mud gently from the creature's fur, clearing its mouth area so it could breathe more easily. Then, carefully, they reached into the cloth bag and pulled out a small metal cup. They filled it with clean water they had been carrying and placed it near the animal's mouth. The beast didn't react at first, but when the human nudged the cup slightly, the creature smelled the water. Its eyes widened faintly. With every bit of energy left inside it, the beast extended its neck forward. Its tongue touched the water, and the moment it tasted the freshness, a spark of life returned to its dull eyes. It drank slowly, taking tiny sips, each one giving it strength the way sunlight warms cold earth. The human watched quietly, making sure not to overwhelm the creature. When the cup was empty, they filled it again. The swamp had been silent all morning, but now, for the first time in days, the air felt alive again. The trapped predator beast was no longer alone. It had been found, and somewhere deep inside its fading strength, a new feeling began to grow, a silent understanding that its fate might not be sealed after all. The swamp was quiet, almost holding its breath as the young predator beast drank the water the human had offered. Each sip gave it a little more strength, but its legs were still trapped deep in the mire. For weeks it had accepted its fate, lying in the mud with no hope of escape, but now something had changed. The human's presence, the fresh water, the careful gestures, it all felt different from the days of silent struggle. There was a calmness in the way the human moved, a careful patience that somehow gave the creature confidence. The human knelt beside the animal, looking carefully at the mud that held its legs. Their hands moved slowly, testing how thick the suction was and how much effort it would take to pull the beast out. The animal watched silently, exhausted, unable to lift its head fully, but it understood somehow that this person wanted to help, not harm. For the first time in days, its body didn't tense with fear. It simply let the human work. The first step was clearing the top layer of dried mud. The human used a long stick and some small branches, brushing away what was hardened by sun and rain. The beast felt the mud loosen slightly around its legs. It pushed a tiny bit with its weak front legs, enough to test the grip of the mire. The human paused and smiled softly, as if reassuring the creature that it was okay to try. The predator responded by pressing a little more, testing the limits of its strength. The human then adjusted the angle of the stick and used it to pry the mud slowly from beneath the beast's legs. The water beneath the surface was thick and sticky, clinging to every inch of the creature. The predator struggled slightly, but this time the effort was different. It wasn't wasted against the endless pull of the mud. Instead, every push made a little difference. The human encouraged it quietly, speaking in soft tones, letting the animal know it wasn't alone. Minutes passed like hours. The swamp seemed to hold still, the birds and insects pausing as if sensing something important. The young predator began to move its legs more, testing strength that it hadn't felt in weeks. The human's presence made it believe, even faintly, that freedom was possible. Slowly, very slowly, the creature shifted forward. The mud released its grip a little. It was not yet free, but it was closer than it had been in weeks. The human noticed the change immediately. They adjusted their position, pressing their hands carefully against the mud and guiding the creature's legs. Every small movement brought tiny victories. The mud loosened around one leg, then another, and the beast began to feel its body respond in ways it had almost forgotten. Its back legs flexed, its front paws pushed harder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the predator felt some hope that the human didn't rush. They knew panic could undo all the progress. They continued to work slowly, step by step, making sure the creature didn't strain itself too much. Occasionally, they spoke softly, almost like a whisper. "You can do it. Just a little more." The predator didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. The calm and patience in the human's voice encouraged it to keep trying. After several tense minutes, the beast's legs were finally free from the worst of the suction. Its body still rested partially in the mud, but now it could move more freely. It flexed its paws, feeling strength return to its muscles. The human smiled again and moved to support its upper body, using their hands to steady the creature as it tested the ground. Beneath it, the swamp had witnessed countless struggles before, but this one was different. Here was a creature that had given up on life, slowly fading into weakness, now rediscovering hope. It took another few minutes, but the young predator managed to push its front body upward, dragging itself partially out of the mud. Its back legs followed, slowly lifting as the human supported them with gentle pressure. Each movement was careful, controlled, and filled with cautious optimism. Finally, the predator pulled itself fully out of the mire. It sat for a moment on the edge of the mud, its chest heaving, its body trembling from exhaustion. Its legs wobbled under it, but it was free. The human knelt nearby, watching and ready to help if it stumbled. The swamp around them seemed almost alive with quiet celebration. The distant birds sang. The water reflected the soft sunlight, and the air felt lighter. The creature paused, as if taking in the new reality. It had been trapped for weeks, days filled with struggle and despair. Now, every movement was precious. Its body still shook, but it tested its legs carefully, feeling muscles it hadn't used in weeks. The human offered more water, placing the cup near its mouth again. The predator drank slowly, lapping carefully this time, and with every sip, it regained more awareness of the world around it. The human noticed a small wound on one of its legs, where the mud had rubbed raw against the skin. They took a piece of cloth from their bag and gently cleaned it, careful not to frighten the creature. The predator didn't move, only watched with tired, observant eyes. It had learned, over the weeks, to accept its limits, but it also seemed to understand that this person was there to help. Not hurt Dot as the afternoon passed, the human stayed nearby, keeping an eye on the young predator. They spoke softly now and then, describing the swamp, the weather, the movement of the birds. The creature listened in its own way, lifting its ears at the sounds and turning its head slightly. It was regaining awareness, learning that the world had not abandoned it entirely. The predator tested its legs more confidently now. It took a step forward, then another. The human stayed close, moving slowly with it, letting it find balance. The mud was still wet in some areas, but the creature learned to navigate carefully. Its body, once too weak to move, responded gradually to each effort. Step by step, it regained mobility. By evening, the beast could stand fully on its own, its legs trembling but holding. It looked at the swamp around it, taking in the sight of water, grass, and sky. It had been weeks since it had felt the freedom to move like this. Its chest rose and fell more evenly now. Its breathing steadied, and there was a spark of energy returning to its eyes. The human remained nearby, quiet and patient. They did not force the creature to move faster or do anything it was not ready for. They simply provided support, water, and encouragement. In the days that followed, the predator continued to gain strength. It walked slowly at first, exploring the edges of the wetland, then gradually tested more solid ground. Each day brought new confidence. The young beast began to move with more agility, running short distances and testing its body. The human watched, sometimes clapping softly or offering more water, making sure the animal did not overdo it. The bond between them grew, silent but strong. The predator learned to trust this presence, and the human learned patience and respect for the animal's limits. The swamp itself seemed to respond. The sun shone a little brighter, the water shimmered, and the distant sounds of life continued without pause. The predator beast was no longer trapped, but it was still learning to survive. Its senses sharpened again, a smell of water, the calls of birds, the rustle of grass. Every movement, every sound, every sight became a lesson in recovery. The human began to prepare for the final step. They knew the creature could survive on its own now, but wanted to make sure it would return safely to the wild. They waited for the right moment, allowing the predator to rest, drink, and regain confidence. And finally, after careful observation, they gave it space. The young predator hesitated for a moment, looking back at the human who had saved it. Its body was strong again, its legs steady. Then, slowly, it stepped into the open water at the edge of the swamp, testing its strength. The human watched quietly, a small smile on their face. Step by step, the beast moved further into its home, reclaiming the freedom it had lost. The swamp was alive around it. The tall grass swayed, birds called overhead, and the gentle breeze rustled the reeds. The predator turned once, as if to acknowledge the human who had saved it, and then disappeared into the deeper wetlands. Its body was strong again, its spirit alive, and the weeks of struggle slowly faded into memory. The human stood silently for a while, watching the swamp return to its quiet rhythm. They had come across something unexpected, a creature in need, and their patience, care, and presence had made a difference. Life, they realized, could be fragile, but it could also endure, especially when kindness reached out at the right moment. The swamp returned to its normal rhythm. But somewhere deep in its waters and grass, a young predator beast had learned once more how to survive. And someone, quietly and patiently, had reminded it that even in the darkest moments, help could come when it was least expected. After weeks of struggle, the young predator beast had finally regained enough strength to stand on its own. Its legs, once trapped and weak from the mire, were now steady. Its breathing, shallow and faint just days ago, had become even and strong. The swamp, which had seemed like a trap for so long, now looked like a world full of possibilities. The sunlight reflected off the water in soft, golden ripples, and the breeze rustled the grass gently. For the first time in weeks, the animal could move freely and observe the swamp around it with awareness rather than despair. The human remained nearby, quietly observing the creature's every step. They didn't rush it. They knew from experience that true recovery could not be forced. The young beast had to relearn its strength gradually, and the human's patience became part of the healing process. They brought water each day, occasionally offering small food items that were safe for the creature, and spent hours simply being present. The calm energy of their presence reminded the animal that the world was not entirely unforgiving. Each day, the predator ventured further from the edge of the mud where it had been trapped. Its steps were cautious at first, hesitant, as if unsure that the muscles in its legs would respond correctly. But with each movement, confidence returned. It began to explore shallow water pools, feeling the cool water against its paws. It lifted its head to watch dragonflies flitting above the surface. It stretched its body fully, enjoying the freedom that had been denied for so long. Sometimes, the creature would stop and glance toward the human. It wasn't a glance of fear or submission, but one of recognition. The human had been there when hope seemed lost, offering patience, water, and care. Now, the predator seemed to acknowledge that it owed a part of its survival to this presence. The human smiled quietly, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction, not pride, but calm relief. This was the reward of patience and compassion, life restored. The swamp continued its natural rhythm around them. Birds sang from the branches above, insects buzzed in small clouds, and the water reflected the changing sky. The predator walked slowly through shallow pools, testing its balance and agility. It pounced lightly on patches of soft mud, discovering again the joy of movement it had forgotten. Each jump, each careful step, reminded it that it could survive and thrive beyond the trap that had held it for so long. Over the next few days, the predator's recovery became more visible. Its coat, once matted and dull from mud and exhaustion, began to shine under the sun as it cleaned itself in the water. Its muscles, long weakened from inactivity, started to respond with strength and precision. It could chase small fish through the shallows, leap over low mud banks, and even move quietly enough to startle a passing bird. The swamp, which had once seemed threatening and unending, now became a place of possibility and renewed life. The human watched, careful not to interfere too much. They knew that true independence would come only when the predator felt strong enough to survive on its own. Some days, they would stay back, letting the animal explore farther into the swamp while they observed from a distance. Other days, they would bring clean water to ensure the creature stayed hydrated and safe. Their presence was a gentle balance, close enough to help if necessary, but far enough to allow the predator freedom. One morning, the predator ventured to a new area of the swamp. The water was slightly deeper here, and the reeds were thicker. For a moment, it hesitated, unsure of its balance. The human stepped closer, softly speaking words it didn't understand, but seemed to appreciate. With a careful step, the predator moved forward, testing its legs, testing the water, testing itself. It took another few steps, and then a leap, landing perfectly on a firm patch of mud. The human clapped softly, a quiet encouragement, and the animal responded by shaking water from its fur, almost playfully. This marked a turning point. The predator was no longer weak or hesitant. It was exploring, testing its world, and enjoying the freedom it had long been denied. Its eyes had regained their brightness, reflecting curiosity and awareness. Its body moved with confidence, strength, and balance. Every step was a statement of survival and resilience. The weeks of struggle, of exhaustion, of acceptance had shaped it, but they had not broken it. The human realized that it was time to let the predator return fully to the swamp. They gave the creature space, standing back and watching as it moved deeper into its natural home. The animal paused for a moment, looking back toward the human. Its eyes met theirs, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The predator had survived because of patience, care, and unexpected help. Now it was time to go forward, independent, strong, and free. The predator took a few more careful steps, then moved faster, running through shallow water and soft mud. Its body stretched fully, moving with strength it hadn't felt in weeks. The human watched quietly, letting the creature explore and reclaim its space. Each movement was a celebration of life and resilience, of trust and recovery. As the day progressed, the predator ventured further into the swamp. It paused only briefly, sniffing the air, listening to the sounds around it, and observing the world it had almost lost. Then it ran again, a fluid, powerful motion that showed how fully it had recovered. Its body, once trapped and weak, now moved with grace and purpose. The human followed at a safe distance, careful not to interrupt or frighten the animal. They observed quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment that cannot be measured in words. The swamp was alive, the predator was alive, and the long weeks of struggle were finally over. The predator explored hidden corners of the wetland it had never seen, leaping over fallen branches and testing the cool water of small streams. Its senses were sharp again. Every smell, every sound, every movement of the water became a guide. It chased small fish and insects, pounced, leaped, and ran, practicing the skills it would need to survive fully on its own. Occasionally, it paused to look back at the human. Not in fear, not in dependency, but in quiet acknowledgement. The person had given it the chance to survive, and now it was taking its place in the world once more. There was a silent gratitude in that gaze, a recognition of care that had made the difference between life and death. The human eventually stepped back completely, allowing the predator to roam freely. It disappeared into the dense reeds, moving with confidence, exploring its swamp home fully. Every step was measured, every movement assured. The creature had survived, not just because of instinct, but because of patience, care, and the unexpected help of someone who noticed it when no one else did. The predator story didn't end there. Over the next days, it returned to its favorite spots in the swamp, exploring, hunting, and testing the world. It grew stronger, faster, and more confident. The swamp, once a place of danger and despair, became its home again, a home it could navigate safely, skillfully, and independently. the human eventually left, returning to their own life, but the lessons of patience, care, and quiet observation remained with both of them. The predator had survived the mire, the dehydration, and the long weeks of struggle. It had learned trust, learned its own strength, and returned fully to life. And somewhere in the wetlands, the young predator beast moved freely, exploring, hunting, and living fully once more. Its eyes shone bright, its body moved strong, and every step reflected the resilience of life. The swamp had taken a lot, but it had also given back. And the creature, once trapped and exhausted, had finally reclaimed its freedom. Weeks later, the swamp seemed peaceful again. The predator had disappeared into its world, stronger and wiser than before. The human returned only occasionally to check from afar, knowing the creature was safe. Nature had done its work, patience had done its work, and life had endured. The predator had survived, fully alive and independent. A living reminder of hope, resilience, and unexpected kindness. Even in the quiet corners of the swamp, where sunlight touched the water and tall grass swayed, the story of survival lingered. It wasn't just about escaping the mire or recovering from exhaustion. It was about the bond between life and care, about patience and courage, and about the quiet moments that make the difference between giving up and living fully again. The predator beast had learned something that no trap could take away: strength, trust, and hope. It moved through the swamp as if it had always belonged, its every motion reflecting the weeks it had survived, the challenges it had overcome, and the life that had been returned to it. The swamp continued its rhythm. The sun rose and set, the water shimmered, and the tall grass swayed. And in this natural world, a young predator beast thrived, free once again, carrying with it the lessons of survival, patience, and quiet human kindness.